Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Brianna Fisher, and I work on the product marketing security team here at Barracuda. Today I'm going to be talking about cyber threats, more importantly, ransomware in particular, the impact that these cyber threats can have, and how to proactively protect yourself in the face of these attacks. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. Email security is no longer just about preventing excessive spam and viruses. These attacks are real, they're sophisticated, and they're extremely costly. Nearly every day there's a news story about malware, and a lot of it is ransomware, which can cost you a lot of money. And it seems as though these news stories just keep coming. Ransomware is constantly in the headlines, and it seems like every single day something new is happening. And if anyone thought that ransomware was starting to become obsolete, that could not be farther from the truth. So ransomware has had a low but steady rise over the past few years up until this year. So if you look at the graph, you can see on the right that that line has shot up in 2017. So what this means is that there have been more variants in the first quarter of 2017 of ransomware than in any other time before it. That's extremely scary, and that's a lot of money being wasted for those who are paying the ransom to possibly get their files back, possibly not. And that's just numbers. That's not just numbers on a screen to scare you. Osterman actually conducted a research this year which revealed that 30% of all organizations were infected with ransomware. That's scary. 1 out of every 3 organizations being infected with ransomware is far too many. And these attacks are indiscriminate, meaning that anyone's money is going to do just fine. These attacks are not necessarily attacking one type of company, one type of group. They just want their money. If you're willing to pay up, then you are their target. And web-based attacks are wide-ranging. They can range from individuals being targeted all the way up to more strategic targets. And they're also using multiple attack vectors to get these attacks done. And now that we've established that everyone is a target, it is important to remember the consequences that a breach can have, and that meaning they can be very costly, not just in financial terms, but also in trust and reputation. So I'm sure you guys have heard about some of the big breaches that have happened in the last few years. I've mentioned them in some of my previous webinars, but places like Sony, Target, and the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, these breaches were big. These breaches made headlines, and they resulted in the theft of multiple millions of user data, accounts, credit card numbers, personal records, and the list really goes on. And in the case of the Target breach, I shop at Target a lot, and so it kind of made me think twice about whether I wanted to shop there, or maybe next time I would pay in cash instead of using my credit card. So it really made me an apprehensive shopper after I found out they had been breached. And according to data from the Poneman Institute in 2015, in a study specifically focusing on the cost of data breaches, the average cost of a breach is around $3.8 million. That's a whopping $3.8 million. What could you do with that money if you weren't spending it on ransomware attacks? And for every stolen record, the cost is about $154. Okay, well, now think about whether your organization can weather a $3.8 million loss for something that could have been easily averted. So let's say that your company was infected with ransomware and you actually paid the ransom to get your files back. Does that really mean that you're in the clear? It's not like the hackers are going to completely remove all the malware from your computer because you're good for it and you already paid once. What's to say that you won't pay again? Maybe you're a repeat target for them because you paid once, and we can probably squeeze some more money out of you in the hacker's eyes. And at what point is this ransomware turning into protectionware? If you're currently asking yourself, oh, is it getting worse? The answer is it is absolutely getting worse. It's getting so much worse to the point that these attacks are becoming all too common. In fact, over 29% of organizations that were infected with malware had no idea where the attack even started from. So this means that they had no idea where the attack even originated. Means that their whole organization and infrastructure could be compromised and no one would know it. And it also means that you don't know where to start with cleanup and remediation. It's a hard thing knowing that you got hit from your email or your network or your mobile device. However, it's even scarier having an unknown source, target your infrastructure and you don't even know where to start with cleanup and remediation. And as I mentioned previously, these attacks are becoming all too common. They're in the news. We hear them all the time. And it's becoming very frequent to hear that, oh, yeah, we got hit by ransomware, or ransomware tried to knock down the doors of our infrastructure, but we actually blocked it. Ransomware is just a common topic of conversation these days. And in that Osterman study that I had mentioned just previously, it was actually found that companies aren't just getting attacked once. They're actually not just getting attacked twice, 3 times. On average, they're getting attacked between 1 and 5 times. So as I mentioned, ransomware is coming up a lot more in conversation. Companies aren't just getting hit. It's not a one and done kind of deal. They're getting hit once, twice, 3 times, up to 5 times. That's over half of the organizations are getting hit between 1 and 5 times. And that's pretty scary. And this is a huge red flag, and decision makers are concerned. Now, I want to pause here for just a quick second and take you back in time. Just 10 years ago, let's say, people were far more concerned with physical theft and email compromise. Those were the main things at the forefront of their minds as far as concerns. So if you fast forward to today, you can see that those items are at the very bottom of that list as far as concerns. So today, more people are worried about infiltration through email and web, and even ransomware more so than anything else. Times are changing, and they're changing quickly. And because of this, many tools are not providing the type of protection that companies need nowadays. So over half of those surveyed said that malware is getting worse. And I think at this point, what I've been able to share with you so far, knowing all of this, that statistic should probably be a little bit higher. Okay, so it's getting worse, but why? So there's a huge, serious economic motivation, as hackers can easily generate money without a great deal of effort. So it's not so much laziness as it is being cost-effective if you are the hacker. And if you can get better returns doing minimal amount of work, then why wouldn't you do this? In addition to economic motivation, there's also increasing sophistication. These are not your teenage kids in a basement type of attack. This is a dark underground world of organized crime. They have networks of people. They have help desks. They have HR departments. And it's this huge network of underground organized crime. They're well financed. They're well equipped. And they often operate as though they're a legitimate business. And there's a lot of money at stake. So as technology advances, new ways of working and playing online are evolving. Data is everywhere, and it's opening up new opportunities to hackers. So there is now more information in the public cloud than ever before. Most people don't realize that this information can be leveraged in surprising ways to form a targeted attack on individuals or organizations when they least expect it. So where users were once static, a firewall and maybe some malware filters might have been enough, just guarding the perimeter. But today there is no perimeter. People move, so does their data, and Wi-Fi is giving access everywhere, and users mostly have no idea of the risks they're being exposed to when they connect to these ungoverned networks. So next time you go to Starbucks and you want to connect to their Wi-Fi, I would maybe think twice about connecting to an ungoverned network that you don't exactly know what you're getting yourself into. And simply put, users spend much of their time on the other side of the firewall and then unwittingly bring the threat back into the network, often avoiding detection. So now what I want to do is take you through the anatomy of a hack. So in this scenario, I want to show you just how easy it is to wreak havoc on someone's infrastructure with essentially the click of a button. So before we get started and before we really dive down into this multi-vector attack, I want to give you a brief kind of overview of what a multi-vector attack is and kind of the different steps that are involved. So the first step is reconnaissance. So as the hacker, you're going to research your target. You're going to get to know who or what you're dealing with. Usually, well, not usually, but sometimes hackers can use social engineering to get information that they might need, and so on. So this step is really about getting to know who you're dealing with, getting to know what you're dealing with, and having all the information you need to form your attack. The second is compromise. So once you have the information that you need, you're going to come up with a phishing attack or some kind of attack to be able to compromise the infrastructure and get inside. Once you're inside, you can begin to move laterally. So the objective here is to infect as many areas as possible within the infrastructure. So that's great if you got in through a phishing email and you have that one machine that you've got onto, but as the hacker, you're going to want to try and move laterally to find as many machines to infect as possible. So once you've found where you want to infect, you're going to install malware. So once I get into all these different places as a hacker, I want to install malware to cause as much disruption as possible. Now, while I'm doing all of this, that brings me to my next step, is obfuscation. So while doing all of these activities, I want to be low and slow, and I want to stay as quiet as possible in order to avoid detection. So I want to do all of these things, but I'm not going to do them to where I'm going to raise red flags, because I want to avoid detection as much as possible. And after you've gone through all of these steps, the last step is damage, deface, and steal. So once you've installed that malware and you've moved into all these different places, you can now damage, deface, and steal the company's or that person's data. So now, going over this brief overview, I want to dive into each of these components a little deeper. So we're going to start with a completely clean network. As far as we're concerned, there are no viruses, there's no malware installed, everything seems to be up and running smoothly. You can see we have some computers, some users, a few servers, we have a database and some web applications. We also have a firewall sitting in front of our cloud in order to monitor incoming traffic. So everything seems to be okay, nothing is compromised at this point, and this is the network that we're going to start out with. So as I mentioned, the first step is recon. So hackers are going to do their research to find out information that they need to know in order to carry out their attacks. So I mentioned earlier social engineering. So we post things on social media with little to no regard of how that information can be used against us. For example, a lot of people don't think that LinkedIn is a social media type of site because it's more used for business. However, it definitely does fall under a social media site. And when you post things on your LinkedIn, such as where you work, your title, job capabilities, all of that fun stuff, hackers can go in and they can find out really sensitive information about you. So for this example's sake, let's say that I am the hacker. I'm going to go on LinkedIn, I'm going to find a certain person, and I'm going to find sensitive information about them, such as their name, their title, and where they work. So now that I'm on this person's LinkedIn, I'm going to find out that their name is John Kimball, they are the director of IT, and they work at Universal Imports. So now I have a pretty good idea of the person that I'm dealing with. So now that I've gotten this sensitive information from the social media site, I can use that to come up with this email. So I am now going to pose as John Kimball, sending this message out to others inside this organization, so which brings us to our next step, which is compromise. So I can now begin to send those emails posing as this other person to other people inside that specific organization. And in my email, I'm going to be letting a user know that his password is going to expire and he needs to click on this link to update his password. So as the user is reading this email, they're thinking, oh, well, I know the IT director. This looks legit. I think it's coming from him. I'm going to go ahead and click on the link and send it right over. And in that moment, the hacker has him. He has the user's credentials, his username, his password, everything. So while the person clicking on this link thinks that they're talking to John Kimball, they're actually responding to a hacker's phishing attempt. Now, it's important to note here that I don't actually care about Doug's credentials or Doug's files. I care about using him to get to company data. So once he clicks on that link, from his point of view, nothing is going to happen. He could click on that link 10 times, 20 times, and nothing is going to pop up or take him anywhere. And from his point of view, nothing has happened. However, in the background, an FTP download has started, and now the hacker can begin to install spyware on Doug's computer. So once the end user has fallen victim to the phishing attack unknowingly, that spyware is going to be installed in the background on their computer, and the attack has now just begun. So like I had mentioned when I started talking about this multi-vector attack, all this havoc is going to be started through the click of a button, which is essentially him clicking on a link to quote-unquote change his password. So once the hacker gets inside the network, a VPN-like tunnel is going to be set up from inside that system to the perpetrator's den, so to speak. And this is going to evade any firewall defense that has been put in place. So these days, hackers don't want to try and break through the firewall. That's extremely difficult. Instead, they want to try and evade the firewall. So once the user gains access, they can now steal things such as your identity, your credentials, and your data. And it's important to kind of point out here that not all firewalls are created equal. This means that firewalls are meant to stop people from coming in, but not all firewalls are going to detect outbound traffic. So in this specific example, that firewall is letting that information out without any problems at all. And this is essentially like having a hacker right in the office, in the seat next to you, stealing your identity and your data without even knowing it. And that's extremely scary. So like I mentioned, once they get inside the network, they're going to begin to move laterally. Once I have access to the user's credentials, that's what I'm going to use to get inside the infrastructure and move around inside the organization to discover different assets, which might be of value to me as the hacker. So at this point, I can start installing malware in other areas, not just where I started. So using those stolen credentials, the hacker can now inject advanced persistent threats that can infect computers, servers, databases, web applications, and the list goes on. And these advanced persistent threats are going to aid in gathering and exfiltrating data. So I mentioned a little bit earlier the target attack that happened just a few years ago. So let's take that target attack as an example and talk about how the hackers broke into Target's POS system and actually gained access to Target's customers. So the point I want to make here is that these hackers went after Target, but in turn got access to Target's customers. So these attacks are reaching far beyond just the companies themselves, and it's affecting third parties, as in this case, Target's customers as well. And like I mentioned, hackers are going to hide the process of what they're doing inside your organization. This means that they're going to be extremely careful in not raising any red flags with what they're doing. They're going to lay low, they're going to go slow, and they're going to fly under the radar so that no one suspects that anything is wrong. So, like I mentioned in Target, data was being exfiltrated for over 4 months before anyone noticed something was wrong. 4 months that people were still using their credit cards and the hackers were just gaining that information. And at this point, the hacker can deface your web applications, they can steal your data, anything that's damaging or in a way defacing any kind of area that has to do with your infrastructure. And this is not to say or guarantee that any of this is going to happen to you or your organization, but it very well could happen. As I mentioned, stories of ransomware and these types of attacks are in the news constantly. And ransomware is a point of conversation that's coming up a lot. And these attacks generally start with a phishing attack, which is what I'm talking about at this point. This whole multi-vector attack started with one guy clicking on one link, and it's led to all of this so far. So it is incredibly scary how quickly things can spiral downward. And this very easily could lead to a ransomware attack. So it started out with just clicking on a link, and it has morphed into the defacing of web applications and servers and databases, and possibly even leading to ransomware attacks. This could also lead to a web attack. So once the hackers have gained access, the point here is that once they're inside the infrastructure, defacing the website or launching a ransomware attack, all of these things become a lot easier. And one final step here, I mentioned this very briefly earlier, but a lot of companies have started their migration to the public cloud. And this is happening for no other reason than there are a variety of benefits for the customer when they do make that transition to the cloud. And we're also beginning to use SaaS services, and we're moving our web applications out to hosted providers or just into the cloud. However, this is all great, but what this means is that if you've moved your assets out from behind your firewall and into the cloud, you now need a new plan for protection. And something extremely important to remember is that cloud providers are responsible for security of the cloud. You are responsible for security in the cloud. So there is a very distinct message that I want you guys to take away from this, is that you have to be responsible for your security posture when you move your assets to the cloud. It is not the cloud provider's job to keep your assets safe. So you need to start thinking, are you secure? Do you have things in place to keep your assets secure? And if you don't, let's have a conversation. So what we've learned so far is that there's a lot of threats out there in the world, and that number of threats is only growing. And we can see that with all these news stories coming out with different variants of ransomware and different variants of threats coming out. So the threat landscape is rapidly changing. In addition to that, the number of infiltration points for hackers is growing. And this means that a hacker can infiltrate through an email threat vector, yes, of course, but also they can infiltrate through web applications, your network, mobile devices, and the list keeps going on. But in addition to that, with the migration to the cloud, the number of attack surfaces is also increasing. So this means that someone can be attacked on their on-premises infrastructure, but they can also be attacked up in the cloud as well. So overall, what we've learned is that we need to secure against all of the threats on all of the threat vectors across all of the attack surfaces, meaning that we need to be able to block any threat trying to infiltrate from any web application, network, email, etc. on any attack surface, whether it's on-premises or in the cloud. So knowing that we need to protect ourselves and knowing that these threats are all in these different places, you might be asking yourself, well, this is overwhelming. This is a lot of information. How can I actually deal with this? So if you're an SMB company, you might be thinking that, well, I don't have the security expertise to deal with this, or how am I going to actually protect myself? And if you're an enterprise organization, you might be thinking, well, how am I going to actually deploy products to protect myself? And how much money realistically is this going to cost me? And this is where Barracuda comes in. So with this evolving threat landscape, Barracuda recognizes that security needs to be faster, it needs to be stronger, and it absolutely needs to be better at securing these threat vectors. However, detection alone is not enough, which is why Barracuda feels like end-to-end security is the best course of action against these threats. So of course, detection is important. It's the first step in finding these malicious threats. But they're getting more sophisticated, which makes them increasingly harder to detect. And for this reason, we've developed a few tools to help weed out these malicious threats, to increase that visibility and to stop them before they become a problem. So, for example, we have things like the email threat scanner. We also have the Barracuda Vulnerability Manager. And I'm going to go over all of these products much more in depth, but this is just kind of give you a general idea of what it means to have end-to-end security. So the next step in end-to-end security protection is preventing the threats from doing any damage. So if the threat can be detected and prevented, problems can be avoided. So in order to help you prevent these malicious threats, we have a few different products in this specific category. We have advanced threat detection, we have our web application firewall, next-gen firewall, essentials, and our web security gateway. Like I said, I'm going to go into these much more in depth in just a minute, but this is just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be diving into. And lastly, things do happen. Detecting and preventing are crucial. However, in order to have true end-to-end protection, there needs to be a recovery plan in place. So gone are the days when we can have that mentality of, oh, I'm never going to get hacked. It won't happen to me. It's been happening to everybody else, but I'm not a part of that. Instead, that mentality must change to, I know it's going to happen to me at some point, but when it does, I'm going to be ready. And this is where Barracuda Backup comes into play. So the first step in this process is detect. So starting out, we're going to be talking about the Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. And this is the first tool that we're going to be talking about. So as I mentioned, organizations are moving to Office 365 at an accelerated rate and for different reasons. So if you're planning on moving to Office 365, or maybe you've already moved to Office 365, there is a period of transition during that migration. So during that time, all of your mailboxes that contain open and unopened emails are going to be migrated over into the new infrastructure. So what the email threat scanner is going to do is it's going to go through those mailboxes with a fine-tooth comb, and it's going to scan them for latent threats. So it's a SaaS service that is connected to a highly intelligent backend with our ATP system. It's completely up to date with the latest threats in real time, and this scan is going to provide you with a full report along with certain recommendations. So it's a free service that Barracuda provides, and it's to ensure a good hygienic condition of your mailboxes on your journey to the cloud. So you can run this free report once, you can run it multiple times, or even on an ongoing basis. You should run it, if for no other reason than to get better visibility on what you're currently dealing with. So to continue with this detect component, we're now going to talk about the Barracuda Vulnerability Manager. So unlike the email threat scanner, this specific scanner is going to deal with web applications. And a web application is just anything that uses or is accessible from the internet. Now, your web applications are probably, or I guess most likely, sitting behind a firewall. And it's very important to note that a firewall will do nothing to stop a web application attack or a vulnerability because it's not the firewall's job to detect web application threats. All the firewall is going to do is say, yes, I see you. I'm happy to direct all my web traffic to my web servers right over there. So what you actually need to secure your web applications is a web application firewall. So the Barracuda Vulnerability Manager is going to help you decide whether or not you might need a WAF and what vulnerabilities your web applications are currently being exposed to. So we're going to be continuing on with the prevent category, and I just want to take a minute to pause here and remind everyone that going through all of these products in this much detail would take much longer than the time that we have. So I want to try and provide a very brief overview of the products and solutions that we have to give you a better idea of how to protect yourself in the face of these attacks. So if you would like to know more in depth on anything that we talk about here, we do have weekly webinars that will go into each of these things at a much more granular level. So watch out for those. The purpose of this specific webinar is to really show you an overview of the tools that are needed to protect yourself. So like I mentioned, if you want to see more in depth of anything we've talked about here, do watch out for those weekly webinars. You can get a much more granular idea on all of these products in those. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next step in our end-to-end security, which is prevent. So it's important to note that over 90% of attacks actually start with a targeted email campaign. So I mentioned that the attack vectors are increasing, meaning that you can be attacked from your email, your network, your web security, or your web applications, and things like that. However, email is still an extremely popular way for hackers to infiltrate a company, meaning that there's a lot of people who have email. A lot of people use email. Almost everyone in corporations have an email. So it is much easier to infiltrate through an email, possibly through like a phishing attack or something of that sort, than trying to break through into the network or something like that. So the email threat vector is one of the most important threat vectors to consider when thinking about your overall security posture. And this is kind of where Essentials comes in. So Essentials is compatible with Office 365 as well as on-premises and hybrid configurations. So its main job is to provide additional layered security to add to the native features in Office 365 for your email threat vector specifically. So it's a suite of tools that provides comprehensive security like sandboxing, archiving, and backup to give you more features and functions than in Office 365. And another feature that's going to fall under the prevent category, but also a part of Barracuda Essentials, is Typosquatted link protection. So in phishing emails, which I've talked to greatly throughout this presentation, hackers try and create links that are going to look credible in an effort to make you click on them. So in our example previously in the Anatomy of a Hack section, when that user clicked on that email, you could see just how quickly it spiraled down and his whole infrastructure was compromised just from the click of that link or that Typosquatted link. So we all spell things wrong. We all skim through reading things without actually taking the time to read them, but there's much, much more to it. A Typosquatted link attack is going to purposely misspell a word, insert it into a link, and put it into an email with the hopes that the recipient is not going to notice. It could be a foreign language spelling. It could be a homograph, which I want to pause here for a second because this bullet point is actually pretty cool to point out. In those parentheses, it looks like that word says example. It looks like it's correctly spelled. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it. However, that P is actually the Greek letter rho. So looking at this with just, the human eye, you're going to say, oh, well, that's spelled correctly. But how are you supposed to know that that's not even the actual letter? It's actually the Greek letter rho, and that's what's called a homograph. In addition to foreign language spelling and a homograph, it could be just a misspelled word. It could lead to a different domain. But all of these things are meant to get you to click on something that's not going to lead to where you think it will lead to. So when Barracuda catches these links, we're going to rewrite them completely. And when we rewrite them, we're going to ensure that they always point back to the essential service. Now, this is crucial because when someone clicks on a Typosquatted link, at any point in time, Essentials is going to interrogate the endpoint of that link. If it turns out that it's a good known link, the user is going to be allowed to go there. However, if it's not, if it's bad, it's going to provide the user with a pop-up asking, hey, did you actually want to go here, or was this a mistake? And in addition to kind of having that pop-up, it's going to provide the end user with online training from one of our partners. And in this training, it's going to show the user how to identify suspicious links and phishing emails. So moving over to the web application side of things now, according to the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report in early 2015, web applications are the most attacked web threat vector and the least secured. So the web application firewall is going to take all the information passed through your traditional firewall to your web application, and its job is to identify any and all vulnerabilities and attacks that can be embedded inside HTTP and HTTPS streams. So while stopping those threats is the WAF's main function, it also does things like load balancing, health monitoring, inbound and outbound inspection, etc. So in addition to those, it's also going to secure against data loss of personal identifiable information. And the WAF is extremely sophisticated, and it's incredibly important when considering the security of your web threat vector. And Barracuda knows this, so we've actually moved to simplify the WAF. We understand that this product can be used for companies that range all the way from SMBs all the way to enterprise organizations, and because of that, there's a certain set of features and functions that we've simplified. So these features and functions include the installation and the initial security configuration, which is a 3-step process. So the Barracuda Vulnerability Remediation Service is a feature that's on the WAF. So once you've purchased the WAF, the first step would be to install it and give it an IP address. So once you've set it up, once it's ready to go, the second step is going to be to point it at your applications, much like you did with the Barracuda Vulnerability Manager Scanner, which I mentioned previously. So you then run the report and you see the vulnerabilities that are exposed. So once you're aware of these vulnerabilities, we made it extremely easy to turn that report into active configuration with essentially the click of a button. So after you complete this, your web applications are going to be secure. So in addition to that, we've made it easy to schedule vulnerability checks on demand. So every time you change something inside your web application, it will automatically do that check. So with this tool, we've taken the sophistication right out of securing your web applications, and we made it extremely simple to give you granular control over that threat vector. So just to remind you again, I don't want to take you through a feature-for-feature presentation. I want to show you what tools are available and try and keep this more relevant to a general overview. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the network side of things, in which we're going to secure the network threat vector. So the question here is, how do you use your firewall to stop any advanced threats from getting in? So every time someone downloads a file through our firewall, as long as they are subscribed to our advanced threat protection service, it's going to be sent to our ATP cloud to be scanned. So once that file or download or whatever it is has been sanitized, it can then be delivered to the recipient. And this is really cool because you don't want to open things that are going to be malicious to your computer or your system or your infrastructure. So ensuring that something is sanitized before it's delivered is ideal. Finally, now we're going to move over to the web security side of things, and Barracuda has 2 products in this area. So one is called the Web Security Gateway, and the other is called the Web Security Service. So one is an on-premises based system, and the other is a cloud-based system or a SaaS-based service. So they both provide content filtering, and that's going to ensure that your employees are not going to be going to the wrong sites. You want to ensure that they're staying focused on their tasks at hand. So the system is then going to provide a comprehensive report on the back end, which is made available to you to see what's going on. So the web application services are attached to our advanced threat protection system as well, which will send any downloads requested by the end user up to the ATP system where the file is sanitized before it's sent back down to the user. And what really differentiates all of these products that I've mentioned is a service that we run over top of them called Barracuda Advanced Threat Protection. So remember, what we've learned so far is the need to protect against all of the threats across all the threat vectors on all of the attack surfaces. So Barracuda has created a multi-layered threat detection system that's been optimized and sent up into the cloud. So it's essentially a cloud-based sandbox that includes a lot of other functions as well. So what we've done here is we've created a microservice architecture up in the cloud. So as an email or a file comes in, it first is going to hit our signature analysis system. And this is going to compare that file or attachment against any existing known threats. So if it sees that it already has a signature, it's going to be blocked. If it doesn't, it's going to be sent up to the next layer, which is the behavioral analysis layer. And at this layer, it's going to be looking at the behavior of the code. It looks for things like spurious coding algorithms, excessive loops, excessively long timers. It's going to say, is it acting normal or is it doing something suspicious or malicious? And if it is, it'll be stopped. If it's still a little iffy, it's going to be sent up to the next layer, which is the static analysis layer. So here, it's actually going to look into the code segments. So all of these layers combine to catch over 95% of threats before they even hit the sandbox. This is an extremely important thing to note here, because if you send 95% of the threats that you receive to your sandbox, it's going to be a slow, cumbersome process. File detonation in the sandbox is directly proportional to file size. So if you send everything that you received up into the sandbox, it's going to take far too long to process each and every one of those files. And the idea here is that you want to create layers to shield your sandbox, so only the really bad stuff gets sent up there. And this advanced threat protection system is actually connected to all of our products and solutions that you can see there on the right. This means that the email security service, email security gateway, web security gateway, firewalls, web application firewalls, they are all connected to our ATP system. And this is extremely important because Barracuda has over 240,000 deployments of endpoints in the world. They're all securing different threat vectors. So we're taking all of this intelligence that we're receiving from things like honeypots, crawlers, Barracuda Labs, customer submissions, all of that. And we're going to bring it into our system and share it amongst our product portfolio systems. And by means of machine learning, our ATP system is going to learn what good code looks like, what bad code looks like, and it can create signatures faster and more efficiently. For example, take a user, let's say in China, and they see an email threat coming in. That email threat will eventually be sent up to the sandbox because, let's say the threat is brand new. It doesn't have a signature, its behavior was not as, suspicious as it could have been, so it ends up getting sent to the sandbox. So that information by means of machine learning then creates a signature. So that means that the next time this same threat is seen in London by means of an upload onto a website, the WAF intercepting it is going to see its signature and not have to send that file up into the sandbox. That's truly differentiation, and that is truly unique to Barracuda. Now, I just want to highlight and mention again some of the key benefits of a layered approach. So the first is you're going to get faster response times. So as I mentioned, over 95% of attacks are caught at those bottom levels to help shield the actual sandbox from becoming bogged down. The second thing to mention here is it's a high-performance sandbox, meaning that it's going to have the ability to detect threats that are designed to evade traditional sandboxes, so you're going to get better protection. And the third thing to mention here is that machine learning is going to lead to increased efficiency and accuracy, meaning that as these threats are coming in and they're identified, that data is tracked, and those results are shared across all other layers for complete protection. Now moving on, it wouldn't be true end-to-end security unless we had a recovery option, which is where Barracuda Backup comes into play. So we believe data protection should be simple. It absolutely should be easy, and it definitely should be fast. So Barracuda Backup is a comprehensive cloud-integrated solution for protecting physical, virtual, and even SaaS environments. So backup is simple, it's easy to deploy, it's easy to manage, and it also offers built-in offsite replication. This means that when all else fails, by no fault of anyone, someone might have just did something that you didn't expect or just something that you weren't aware of, you have the ability to back up and recover. And we believe that a time machine approach is best. So if attacked, the time between backups is all that you're going to lose. So backup is one of the most important features in improving your security posture. So moving on, it's really important to have a comprehensive solution, meaning end-to-end security. So I've already touched heavily on the fact that it's so important to secure against all threats on all threat vectors across all attack surfaces, which is why Barracuda aims to create and sell products that are going to protect any user using any application on any platform in any cloud from virtually anywhere. So at Barracuda, as I mentioned, we want to make solutions that are going to make an IT guy's job easier, starting with the fact that we offer a free 30-day trial, meaning that you can take whatever product you're considering, you can put it in your environment, and you can ensure that it's going to work for you and your company's needs. And a lot of our customers have reached out and said that the free trial was extremely helpful in making that purchasing decision, as they could see if that solution really did work for them in their environment. The second is we offer 24/7 support, region support around the world. So if you're calling from EMEA, you're going to get a support person in EMEA. If you're calling from the United States, you're going to get a person in the United States. Either way, we have you covered. And finally, something I want to touch on that's pretty cool here is our hardware refresh program. So if you maintain our instant replacement subscription, every 4 years, we're going to give a new version of the same model for free. So as processing power and capacity are always increasing, this means that you're always going to be getting the latest solution that Barracuda has to offer every 4 years. So moving forward, I just want to give you guys a few things to think about. So the first is consider your current security posture. Do you have solutions in place that are going to protect you? If not, do you have a backup solution in place? Think about what you could stand to lose in the face of an attack right now with the current security that your company has. The next is contact us for a risk assessment. We're here to help. Reach out. We're here to help give you a better idea and better visibility into what you're dealing with. And I also had mentioned throughout the presentation a few free scanners that you can use at your own discretion. So the first is the email threat scanner. Again, you can follow that link right there. You can run the scan yourself or reach out. We can run it for you. This is just to give you a better visibility onto what you're dealing with on your journey to the cloud. The second there is the web application scanner. Again, follow that link. You can run it yourself. You can contact us. We'll run it for you. And this, again, is going to give you better visibility into what you're dealing with. So with that, I want to go ahead and thank everybody for joining me today. I appreciate your time. I hope there was something for everybody in this presentation. At this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the questions box. We're here to answer your questions, so please don't be shy. I'm going to give you a few minutes, so go ahead and think about your questions, drop them in that questions box, and we'll get to it in just a moment. Thank you, everyone who is asking questions. I'm going to give just a few more minutes for those of you who want to ask questions, just so we can address them all at one time. Thanks, guys. All right, it looks like the last of the questions have been added. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the questions box. I'm going to go ahead and take these questions offline and respond to them each individually. It looks like we have a pretty good list of questions going. So if you have any last minute questions, go ahead and drop them in. But at this time, I just want to take a second to thank you all again for joining me. I hope this presentation was useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you, everybody.